Hey, book lovers! Welcome to While I Read. I'm Katie Dodrell, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 fantasy novels. As you know, I recently read A Court of Thorns and Roses and didn't like it, but it made me start thinking about fantasy books that I do like. So I decided to make a list of them. Some books or series on my list are pretty popular ones that you've probably heard of, but I bet there are some on my list that you aren't familiar with. Making this list helped me realize that the fantasy books I like have certain shared characteristics. For one, I generally like my fantasy to be fairly lighthearted and happy. I don't like the dark. For another, though I do like adventure, I also like reading about the characters' everyday lives. I want plenty of description of the characters' time spent training or learning their craft or their fighting skills. Those are always some of the most interesting parts of fantasy books to me. Finally, I like description of the characters' time spent resting. Like they just fought a dragon and then they find their way to this small village where they get cozy and sleep in a hayloft. I've never read a book where that happened, but I think it would be a good scene in a fantasy novel. I don't know if other people enjoy these periods of rest as much as I do, but they're always some of my favorite parts of fantasy books. What are some qualities or tropes that you like in fantasy books? Do you like some of the same ones that I do, or do you have different ones that you like? Let me know in the comments. So let's jump into my top 10 list. Number 10 is Island of the Ants by Eva Ibbotson. Like I said, I feel like there are some books on this list that a lot of people will have read, and then there are some that many people won't have heard of. I feel like Island of the Ants might be in the never heard of it category, though I could be wrong. This book is about three women, the ants of the title, who live on an island caring for sea creatures. Some ordinary creatures, but also some magic creatures like mermaids or selkies. The ants need someone to carry on their work for them after they're gone. So they decide to kidnap three children, bring them to the island, and train them in looking after the creatures. I know the kidnapping plot may be a little disturbing for some people, maybe a little scary for some kids, but the book is really, really good. Ibbotson's writing style reminds me a lot of Roald Dahl, very imaginative and humorous. The book is set on an island, making it beachy and fun, and it has some complex characters and scenes. It's a middle grades novel, but I read it first when I was in my 20s and loved it. Number 9 on my list is the Shadowfell series by Juliet Marillier. Or is it Marillier? I'm not sure. She's an author that I discovered just a few years ago, and I really enjoy her young adult fantasy novels. She actually appears twice on this list. First, let's talk about the three-book Shadowfell series: Shadowfell, Raven's Flight, and The Caller. These books are about a young woman named Naren who lives in a land called Albin and has the ability to communicate with the good folks, tiny fairy like creatures. The king of Albin does not look kindly on the good folk or on anyone who can communicate with them. So Naren has to keep her ability secret. The series follows Naren as she completes journeys throughout Albin, receives training from the mysterious guardians, and fights alongside the good folk to defeat the wicked King Keldek. She also falls in love with a double agent named Flint, making this book fit the romantasy genre. When I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, I was actually hoping for something similar to Shadowfell. Obviously, that is not what I got. But the Shadowfell series is a great fantasy series with everything I love: world building, epic journeys, battles of good versus evil, and plenty of description of the characters' everyday lives and their periods of rest. Book number 8 on my list is Wildwood Dancing by Juliet Marillier. I told you she'd appear again on the list, and here she is already. Wildwood Dancing is set in Transylvania in a castle called Piscul Draculae, where 5 daughters live with their widowed father. The main character is the second oldest daughter, Gina. The 5 sisters have a mysterious secret. At every full moon, they can go through a magical portal in their room and enter an enchanted world. They spend every full moon dancing the night away in this enchanted other kingdom with fairies, goblins, and even some vampires. The trouble starts when the girl's father is forced to leave them for the winter to spend it in a warmer climate to improve his health. Their cousin is left in charge, and he begins to suspect the sisters of consorting with the magical creatures and tries to stop it. The book is wonderfully imaginative and atmospheric, with its descriptions of the old castle and the mysterious surrounding forest. I like to read it during cold weather since it's set in a frigid Transylvanian winter. The relationship among the sisters is another fun aspect of the book. There is actually a sequel called Sibyl's Secret, which focuses on one of the younger daughters, Paula. I enjoyed it, but I don't love it the way that I do Wildwood Dancing. Wildwood Dancing is a great young adult fantasy, perfect to read on a cold winter's day. Seventh on my list, we have a series that most people are familiar with: The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. These books are wonderful because they can be enjoyed on 2 levels. On the surface, they're stories of a magical land featuring talking animals and children performing amazing acts of heroism. But on a deeper level, they are allegorical stories of Christianity. There are 7 books in the series, and I like them all, but my 2 favorites are The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is first in the series, and The Silver Chair, which is fourth in the series. By the way, there's actually a little controversy over whether you should read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first because it was published first, or The Magician's Nephew first because it chronologically comes first. I fall firmly in the camp of reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first because it's a better book and a better introduction to the world of Narnia. The book starts with the 4 Pevensey children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, being sent away from their home in London during World War II due to air raids. They go to a home in the country and they find a wardrobe that is a portal to a magical land called Narnia, where animals can talk and the wicked White Witch has cast a spell on the land so that it's always cold, snowy winter. The book tells the story of the Pevensey children allying with the noble lion Aslan to fight the White Witch. The next few books in the series follow the Pevensey children. But my second favorite book, which is the fourth in the series, The Silver Chair, is about 2 different children named Jill and Eustace, who journey to Narnia to help find a lost prince. Both books are full of epic journeys and awesome adventures. In The Silver Chair, the children end up in a castle full of giants where they're invited to a feast, but then they discover that they're meant to be the feast. They also journey to an underground world called Underland that's full of sparkling gems and minerals. The series is very entertaining for both kids and adults. Definitely give it a try if you haven't, or reread it if you read it as a child. Remember, start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, not with The Magician's Nephew. Book number 6 on my list is The Blue Sword by Robin McKinley. Robin McKinley is one of my favorite fantasy authors and will make another appearance a little higher on this list. The Blue Sword is about a young woman named Harry, short for Angharad, who goes to live in the land of Damar. Harry gets kidnapped by the Damarian king, learns to love Damar, and discovers that she has magical powers. Robin McKinley's world building in this book is just so awesome. Her descriptions of the Damar landscape and people and legends are just so much fun to read. In one section of the book, Harry goes with her mentor into the desert to learn to ride and fight like a true Damarian. And I love the description of her learning about her destiny and gaining the skills that she'll need. One of the things that I love about McKinley's books is that they usually feature animals. In this book, Harry has a beautiful horse named Sun Gold, and she gets adopted by a hill cat named Nartnon. Sun Gold and Nartnon are both important parts of the book. I also like that Harry is described as being tall and awkward, someone who probably should have found a husband by this age but hasn't. We've established that I gravitate toward heroines who are not conventionally attractive. This is a book that you can just get lost in, and I love it. It's considered to be a young adult book. I first read it when I was in college. Number 5 on my list is The Prince and the Pilgrim by Mary Stewart. Mary Stewart is known both for her novels of romantic suspense and for her Merlin trilogy. This book is not part of the Merlin trilogy, but it takes place in the same world of Arthurian legend. It has 2 protagonists. One is a young prince named Alexander who sets off on a journey to Camelot to find King Arthur and achieve justice for his father's murder. Along the way, he becomes ensnared with the seductive enchantress Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's sister, who is involved in a quest for the Holy Grail as she attempts to defeat Arthur. The other protagonist is a young woman named Alice. Her father is a devout Christian, and on one of their religious pilgrimages, they come into possession of a cup which may be the Holy Grail. The book is about Alexander and Alice's individual adventures, as well as how the Holy Grail brings them together and brings them further adventures. It's a great fantasy novel based on Arthurian legend. I told you that Robin McKinley would be on my list again, and here she is. Number 4 on my list is Beauty by Robin McKinley. Beauty was actually the first book that I read by Robin McKinley. And as you might guess, it's a retelling of the story Beauty and the Beast. The Beauty character in this story is actually named Honor. As a child, she doesn't understand what the word honor means, and so she tells her father she'd rather be Beauty. Beauty becomes her nickname, and as she grows older, she's embarrassed by this nickname because she doesn't consider herself to be beautiful. As I said, I usually like heroines like this, and Robin McKinley is so good at writing them. Beauty's family loses their money and they are forced to move to a small cottage in the country. As in most Robin McKinley books, there is an animal who's important to the plot. In this case, a horse named Greatheart, who loves Beauty and becomes legendary for his great strength. Beauty eventually ends up in the Beast Castle, and the descriptions of her time there are my favorite parts of the book. Beauty is waited on by a pair of invisible maids. She spends time in the castle and on the grounds with the beast and learns to like him. And the castle has an enormous library where Beauty can read all the books that she wants. And unlike A Court of Thorns and Roses, this retelling of Beauty and the Beast does not suddenly ambush its readers with torture, beatings, and dead bodies nailed to walls. Beauty is a fresh and surprising take on a classic fairy tale. It's a young adult book, and I first read it when I was around 18. So, while you may not have heard of all the books on my top 10 fantasy novels list, you're probably not surprised by number 3, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I couldn't make a list of my top 10 fantasy novels and not include it. The Hobbit is, of course, the story of a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins who leaves his happy, peaceful, well fed life for an adventurous journey involving dwarves, elves, trolls, a creepy creature named Gollum, and a fierce dragon named Smaug. Unlike most people, I actually prefer The Hobbit to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Hobbit is just so lighthearted, and the scene where Bilbo plays the riddle game with Gollum in the dark is just so creepy. It's just the right amount of creepy for me, and it's one of my favorite scenes in all of literature. I won't say too much more about The Hobbit because most people have already read it, but if you haven't read it, you need to. Also, the book is so much better than the movies. There did not need to be 3 movies for this book. So read it. Or if you've already read it, reread it. I first read it in middle school and have read it almost every year since. Number 2 on my list may be a book that you aren't familiar with, Wren to the Rescue by Sherwood Smith. I first read this book when I was about 10 years old, and I've reread it many times since. It's about a young orphan named Wren, and it starts as she discovers that her best friend Tess, who is supposed to also be an orphan, is actually a princess in disguise. Tess is going back to her parents in the country of Meldreth to take her place as the princess, and Wren gets to come along. But soon after their arrival, Tess gets kidnapped, and Wren sets off on an adventure to rescue her friend, helped by a young student magician named Tyron and by Tess's cousin, Prince Connor. Along the way, Wren finds unexpected magical allies, discovers her own magical talent, and gets turned into a dog. I loved it as a kid. For many years, I thought Wren to the Rescue was a standalone book, but as an adult, I discovered that there are actually other books in the series. I read the other books and liked them, but I don't love any of them the way that I do Wren to the Rescue. It's a great middle grade fantasy novel that I'd recommend for kids or for adults who like fantasy. Number 1 on my list is the Harry Potter series. I know this is another predictable choice, but I just can't help it. I love Harry Potter. Probably most people know what Harry Potter is about, so I'll just talk about some of my favorite aspects of the books. I love the physical description of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, with its towers and dungeons and the great hall that's bewitched to look like the night sky. J.K. Rowling creates a whole magical culture and vocabulary with words like muggles for non magical people or Quidditch for the magical sport. I do love the Harry Potter movies, but I have to say, the movies don't let you fully immerse yourself in the world the way that the books do. J.K. Rowling's world building is just phenomenal. My 2 favorite books in the series are the first book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and the third book, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. The books get darker as the series continues, and while I do like the later books, we've established that I like my fantasy to be light. So the first three books are my favorite in the series. I love reading about the characters' everyday lives at Hogwarts, and the first books have exactly the right amount of fun and creepy moments. What's better than a troll in the dungeons or scary soul sucking creatures boarding a train or the whole school having to sleep in the Great Hall because there's a murderer loose in the castle? You just can't beat it. This is my original copy of The Sorcerer's Stone that I've had for probably about 20 years, as well as my original copy of The Prisoner of Azkaban, well worn, as you can see. I also have this beautiful copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I bought this one in England, and it has a special cover that, for one, has the original British title of the book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. You know, in the US, we're too dumb to know what the Philosopher's Stone is, so they changed it. This book is also special because it is from the Ravenclaw house. It's special for people who are Ravenclaws, and that is my Harry Potter house. My husband Ryan is a Hufflepuff. If you become a Harry Potter fan, you have to know things like this. I just love the Harry Potter books. If you're watching this, you've probably read them, but there are quite a few people who have only seen the movies. And if that's you, do yourself a favor and read the books. They are so good. Well, that's my list of my top 10 favorite fantasy books. I've had a great time making this list and talking about all of these books. I hope I've given you some ideas for new books to read, or maybe for of old favorites that you want to pull down and reread. Please comment about any of these books that you've read or about any of your favorite fantasy novels that I didn't mention. Now, go slay a dragon while I read.